Hey, what's up, nerdies? English Dave here with my co-host Mercedes and Rocket Mike. What's up, guys?
What's up?
What
Today,
up?
today we're here for something different from what we've done before. This is our first documentary review. We're looking at the documentary Console Wars. The synopsis is as follows. A look back to 1919 when Sega, then a fledgling arcade company, assembled a team of underdogs to take on the greatest video game company in the world, Nintendo. For those youngsters out there, yes, Nintendo were once the powerhouse. For a better comparison. But let's start off with the beginning. I'm going to start with you, Mike. I know this, but the listeners may not know this, but how much of a video game fan are you? And what was the first system you ever got?
I was going to start there.
Okay.
So I've been playing without my consent since I was like 3 years old. I don't know if it was given to me or if my dad bought it himself, but we had the original NES, Nintendo Entertainment System, in our house, and that was the first system I ever remember playing. And that ended up being for a few years, and then we'll get into what the progression was like after this. But yeah, that was the original, and remember just playing in a dark room, Super Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt, because I think those were like the two that came with the system at the time. Or at least that was the most popular ones. But man, how it's evolved has continuously blown my mind. How much further it's gone, and the fact that we're here today, this year with another console war happening.
Right.
It's like, how many more are we going to see? How many years are we going to go through consoles? What's the next evolution past a console is my question. But
and who's next, right? Because the console wars have evolved, right? It used to be Nintendo, Sega. Now you're seeing Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo's kind of slipping in there a little bit once in a while.
They're their own party,
Yeah.
That's like, you're looking at like Democrats and Republicans, and Nintendo's like the independent or like Green Party, and they're just like, we're ourselves. We don't fuck with that. We do our own thing.
You guys can bicker. We'll just end a little thing on the side. Mercedes, what about you? Typically the cliche and stereotype is girls don't play video games. Obviously,
Right.
That's incorrect. What was your first video game system?
Probably playing with my uncle on his Sega Genesis, and playing Sonic and all of those games. But then my first system was definitely a PlayStation. Crash Bandicoot for life. Number one fan.
Totally.
And then Metal Gear Solid. Yeah, of course you can't. Snake is a classic. So yeah, PlayStation. But I do love Xbox, and I have a whole Xbox family now, so it's like I feel really bad saying that, like I'm cheating on them. Like, oh God.
That's the one. I've never owned an Xbox system. I've owned every other company, never owned an Xbox system.
Just
Well, you owned the Xbox One?
Oh, I took a brief stint and I skipped PS3 and did 360. Because of the influence that was around me at the time. And guess what ended up happening? I had the red ring of death, and I never went back to Microsoft. Boy,
The red ring gets you every time.
Maybe a Sony buyer for life. I'm never going back.
No, my first system was Super Nintendo. I remember I had that with like Super Mario World, which I still play now because they have it on the Switch. Still a fantastic game. Still holds up. Still just as great. And I remember also, what else did I have? I had Mario All-Stars as well, which is a great package. That wasn't a Super Nintendo. Yeah, no, that wasn't Super Nintendo. Mario All-Stars. But I remember my brother ended up getting what you guys call the Genesis. In Europe, it was called the Sega Mega Drive.
What?
My brother got that. Yeah, I don't know why the name difference.
It's a terrible name.
The Mega Drive. Come on. Mega Drive just sounds.
They didn't even mention that in the documentary.
I know. There's a lot they don't mention, but we'll get into that later. I grew up a huge Nintendo fan. I mean, look at my T-shirt.
No, of
Boom.
course.
I was a huge Nintendo fan. I was just that kid. The same way I ended up loving Marvel and stuff like that. That's how I love Nintendo. I met my best friend arguing what's better than Nintendo 64 or the PlayStation. That's how we ended up becoming best friends. We would argue about that in school. I used to love the characters and all that. And I grew up a huge gamer but I enjoyed playing games with people and the fun of that. But let's get into this documentary. It's actually based on a book by journalist Blake J. Harris, who also co-directed this documentary with Jonathan Tillis, and it was produced by Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg. Let's just go straight into it. We'll try to keep not many spoilers, but I feel like we can talk spoilers because this is all public information. It's just how it's presented. It's not like, oh, shocker, what happened to Sega? We all know how it ended up. So I just want to start with you, Mike. Usually I'd say what we're expecting, but I think the documentary is slightly different. So I'll just ask you, how did you feel about how the documentary itself was presented? Because I feel like documentaries can fall or either make it or break it on how it's presented. So what did you think of the presentation itself?
I think it played like a movie, and I having learned from you that they were thinking about making this into an actual series with actors and a script. I feel like they still took that style while still keeping all of the old clips from the time in the 90s when all the kids were like, racing to these shops that Sega had put up and everyone's gaming. There's competitions. I love the clips of Christmas, with the kids opening up the system. They're freaking out in almost like a demonic way, I love that nostalgia they put in there. And the combination of animation that they put in as well to kind of put a visual on the stories that they've been telling. It kept you engaged. It wasn't just, interviews after interviews. You're talking about video games, you got to be an entertaining documentary. So I really enjoyed this and I learned a lot.
Sure. I thought the presentation was really well done. Like you mentioned, the animation, instead of doing reenactments, they give us the animation, but the animation is in the style of video games at the time, which I thought was very, very, very. Some of the animations, I was like, wait, is that a game? No, that's a reenactment. Some moments. Sadie, I want to talk to you about, just how did you feel about, it was done more through interview processes of the people who are in the know, right? It's, some of the information isn't new information, but we've only ever received the information from third parties, where this is more like first-hand information. So, and in a way, we got to know. It almost gave Nintendo and Sega, gave them personalities in a way. So what do you think of that kind of format?
It definitely gave them personalities. I feel like you got to see these executives compete with each other, and that saying where it's like it's always high school. It kind of was like that in a sense in the games that they played with each other corporate wise. The tactics that they used to get under each other. And then sometimes it was just very childish, which was kind of fun because it just brings it back to, we're human. And these two companies were both super passionate about what product they were putting out. I liked this documentary I liked the pacing and the comedy aspect of it. It was, not a joke, but just, they didn't take themselves too seriously and the subject matter that they were talking about, but they still had the sense of pride. It was just like, it was really cool to listen to that perspective. Because like you said, we know what happened to Sega, but we don't know generally like the details, and getting those little details and like hearing it from the horse's mouth. And those anecdotes and like the emotion behind those stories definitely filled in a lot of blanks, and like, it gave you a new sense of nostalgia of, those two systems growing up.
I always find it interesting when you look back at these things, right? Where at the time people are saying, I have no idea where this is going to go. This is a risk. This could fail. Knowing that certain things would succeed and do very well to a certain level, like just seeing how Sonic was made. And some people pushing back against it and realize, well, that ended up being a good thing, which ended up leading to the best video game movie adaptation. Like just seeing the string of events that happened, right? I find that super interesting. It's almost like a time machine. And Mike, you mentioned nostalgia earlier on. I agree. I think they did a very good job of bringing that nostalgia, because watching it, I was taken back myself, to this time and place. I thought that was really well done. What did you think of the idea that, and I don't think this is a spoiler, it almost, in some ways, I don't know if it's a negative or positive, that's what I want to ask you, in terms of presenting it was almost as if Sega was the protagonist of the story.
For sure. I felt like this was actually a documentary about Sega.
Yeah, not console wars. It was like, this is about Sega. Even the description.
I preferred it because we've all accepted that Sega was king at one point. I myself had the Genesis over the Super Nintendo. And watching this kind of made me glad that I happened to choose correctly.
So that's why.
Yeah. It's like, okay. And again, I don't remember having the choice. It was just kind of like, this is probably the clear thing, Yeah. And And so I was very curious, even though I had accepted that it would just fade it out, like Dreamcast was the last one, and we all kind of understood, like, okay, well, but there's better stuff out there. So we all accepted that it just disappeared. But it was still such that you never look back and ask why. How did this all come to be? This wasn't just a bad marketing campaign or bad software. It was a combination of so much, and then even politics having a lot to do with it too. So to really gauge why something happened was something I never asked myself before, but now I've become so interested into how it's literally the rise and fall of the Sega empire. And so I almost want to watch it again just to get more details, because I want more like this. I'm like, okay, now let's keep going. What's going on with Sony and then their competition with Microsoft? We're living it right now, but I'd like to know a little bit more about the first battle between the PS2 and the original Xbox. Let's keep this going.
Console wars, just have a whole series of the various entities. No, I thought they did a good job of kind of presenting, like you said, showing the rise and fall, and I didn't know, I knew Nintendo was so dominant, but I didn't know how dominant they were. That to the point where no one even had the balls to kind of step up to them until Sega came down. And it was interesting because I found it interesting that because the industry as a whole was very new, people's tactics were just experimental, right? Let's try this, see what happens.
Everything was experimental.
Right? Because nobody knows how it's going to go.
A shot in the dark.
Right?
I don't know if this is going to work, but I'm just going to throw it out there.
Or even thinking about things like how, I won't go into details of how it happened, but just why video games became mature. You think that was just a natural progression, which makes sense, but in this story, it's well, not quite. Is part of it was marketing, to be do something different at the time. And now we look back and be wow, violent video games were different. It's now it's the opposite. If it's not violent, it's different, right? Those are the ones that have taken over.
You gotta thank Sega though, because Sega took that other turn into a lane of a more mature video game. It told Nintendo that times are changing and you need to change with it. You can't just market to one type. You need to abide by everyone now. And it wasn't until that Sega had actually gone so hard to do this that is probably why Nintendo is still relevant to today.
Sadie, I want to ask you about just the idea of the characters, the people themselves, right? The drama in the story. How did seeing the drama, I won't get into details, but the drama, what happened? I didn't expect as much drama. We mentioned off podcast that this was initially going to be a scripted movie. I could have seen that. Based on
it's definitely Big Short vibes, crazy things happening, and a ragtag team, people coming together and putting out this product. And that's what you got from the film. And I think it was so cool seeing all these different personalities and personalities that would never ever probably even work together, and then having them in the same workplace, and then seeing the result of that. Having two CEOs, a Sega of America and a Sega of Japan, and have that identity of that culture, and that culture actually translating later in the way that we do business now. Every company now has, of America and of whatever country it is. So it's just interesting to see how business played out. But I feel like it was just funny. That's still high school. You guys are adult men.
And I think that plays into the fact that one, half these people didn't know what the fuck they were doing because this was such a new industry, and two, the other half kind of fell into this industry. You had some people coming from completely different industries, fucking Mitsubishi right? Mattel. It makes sense in hindsight. It makes sense in hindsight. Okay, you can bring the skills, but at the time, it's just it's hard for us to fathom that people had to explain what Nintendo was. Things like that.
And how to pronounce it.
How to pronounce it, right?
What's a
Nintendo?
That was the word of the movie, Nintendo.
Is that a fabric softener? What is
it? One criticism I have with this, and this is only because I know certain parts of history, is that it delves on Sega's connection with Sony, but it doesn't touch on Nintendo's connection with Sony. Nintendo and Sony actually made the Nintendo PlayStation. That if you search on Google, there's actually a prototype you can find. So when Sony left Sega, they went to Nintendo, and then that fell apart, and then PlayStation came out. It kind of skips. In fact, it skips a lot of the PlayStation. It kind of goes into like, and PlayStation's here.
Yeah, it really did.
Which I almost wish is like you either left it out and set it up for a sequel like Mike wants. I almost like wish they kept it between Nintendo and Sega. I thought the PlayStation almost made me like want it, and it's like, oh, okay, we're not really getting into that, And I kind of wish they, but then again, that's just some minor criticism for me. Any criticism that you guys have?
No, it was highly entertaining, and even if you're not a video gamer, lots of information, for you to get, and maybe for you to understand. If your partner is a gamer and you're like, I don't get it,
right.
You might get a little insight and see, where the love and the craziness comes from. So I think you'll enjoy it.
Mike, do you have any criticisms?
I'm kind of with you on that one. I felt like I understand, of course, it was all about Sega versus Nintendo, but obviously Sony is now, the new king. I would have liked to know more, and something that is a very quick fact that you said too was that Sony had partnered with Sega, and then suddenly it was Sega versus Sony. I didn't even know that Sony went to Nintendo whatsoever either. Those were all just kind of like, here it is, and now we're done. I would have liked to know a little bit more on like what made them fall out and even connect right then and there. Because Sony at the time was just known for TVs and music. They were very big in music. So I also like, what was the inspiration to even make a console? Why would you want to throw your hat in the ring? So I guess what I'm asking is now a documentary about Sony.
Console Wars 2. Well, side note, they are doing a Console Wars series, but I think it's scripted series, so maybe they might go into that stuff. Oh, one thing I found interesting as well is, it's something we never think about. These console wars are essentially, outside of Microsoft, Japanese companies fighting in America, which I find such an interesting, it's like people forget, and or at least don't think about the fact that Sega, Nintendo, Sony are Japanese companies. They're not American companies. They may have American, bases, but they're fundamentally Japanese companies, and I find that hilarious. And then that's why Microsoft later comes in as the first American company to really go hard on video games. Also, just I like the idea that the narrative that it speaks on like Mercedes touched on, the differences between Sega of America, Sega of Japan, and Nintendo of America, Nintendo of Japan. And how this documentary goes into how the two companies worked with their twin countries or twin cities. Nintendo clearly did a better job of working with their American Japanese counterpart, whereas Sega didn't, which kind of partly led to Sega's downfall. That kind of lack of communication. Oh, I want to show you guys something, by the way, before I finish. I just thought I'd bring that out. It's dusty. I didn't dust it off. They're my old Nintendo 64 right there. A couple of my games. Mario Kart, the best game ever.
Yep.
Do you remember Perfect Dark?
I do.
The sequel to GoldenEye, which I have GoldenEye here as well.
That's like stapled in there.
Hell yes. Hell yes. I think that's pretty much all. I enjoyed the documentary. I thought it was very, 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 very insightful. I was never bored. Like Sadie, you mentioned, I think you made a good point. I think it's also a good documentary for people who aren't gamers. I think the best part is that it's not only aimed at gamers. I think if you're not a gamer, you can get an understanding of why this world is so popular and so big. And it is big. Like, it's huge. You don't realize it's not a small little
$150 billion industry.
Right?
Yeah.
Insane.
Crazy. Like, damn, I'm going to go play my Switch right now. Thank you, Mercedes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rocket Mike.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you guys for listening. What do you guys think of our first documentary review? Let us know. Find us on social media at The Nerdy Bunch, where you can check out all our other podcasts and reviews. And if you haven't watched this yet, Console Wars can be found on CBS All Access. And as always, Mike,
keep it nerdy.
Keep it nerdy, guys. Peace.